Hey, what's up, guys? I'm Jared Veldeer, host of the Velbeer Show, and I've kind of been slacking on a formal video intro. So here goes. We're gonna start cranking out some legit intros from here on out. Today's show is awesome. I had Neil Fisher on from Weldworks Brewing out of Greeley, Colorado. Neil and I talked about a whole bunch of awesome beer-related things, like why choosing Greeley, what small independent craft breweries can do for their neighborhood, for the local economy. And then we got to the fun stuff, like how do you make world-class hazies? Because Neil is certainly doing that over at Weldworks. And I thought it was really interesting, kind of the genesis of Juicy Bits, which is their flagship hazy that is won many awards. And it caught me off guard a little bit, one of the hops that he throws in there. It's a hop that I played around with a little bit, but didn't necessarily think it would marry as well to a couple other hops that he throws in that beer to make just a masterpiece of an IPA. So anyway, guys, it was a pleasure talking to Neil. You guys are going to love this chat. Tune into the very end. Don't miss anything and enjoy the show. Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Velbeer podcast. With me today, I got Neil Fisher, the owner, founder, head brewer, hop wizard, man of many talents over at Weldworks in Greeley, Colorado.
One, two, 3, go! Hey, 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 fill it up, hey, 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 fill it up, hey, 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 fill it up, hey, hey, hey.
Neil, what's up?
Hey, thanks so much for having me. How are you?
I'm well. Just actually crushed a couple of leftover breakfast burritos from the lunch week from last week. So I'm nourished and ready to go. I'm excited. Juicy Bits is one of the beers that got me really rolling with the hazies. Before we get into kind of the nuts and bolts of what you guys are doing, one thing I like to just kind of start with is just something that you guys have had to kind of work through at Weldworks, outside COVID, that you weren't expecting, something that popped up and you guys had to work through.
For us, it's kind of been a continuous, I think we're still surprised by our growth and by just having to continually, adapt and figure out what's next. I think it even started with year one. We just didn't anticipate anything like this. So we're coming up on our 7th anniversary in February of 2022. So even just 7 years in, it seems like every year we're kind of waiting for us to hit that ceiling or plateau, and it's just not happening. So I think it's just for us been a constant evolution. Like, what are we doing this next year to address everything that's ahead of us? COVID obviously added that, but yeah, all these growth challenges.
I bet. Is it easier to pick up Juicy Bits in Denver than it was 3 years ago when I was there? It was like almost impossible to find.
Yeah, it definitely is. That was just, short, like that was probably when Juicy Bits we still couldn't keep up. We're at the point now where we kind of have enough volume carved out to what we want to continue to produce. And so most of Denver, the whole Front Range, we're able to canvas really well. So it should be almost any of the liquor stores that most of our kind of fans frequent. They can find Juicy Bits on a regular basis. And that's our only year-round beer. So we don't have any other flagships beyond that one.
Nice. Is it over at the Bonnie Bray liquor shop? In Wash Park, that was my go-to. It had the really cool old school coolers, like really old dairy coolers. Yeah,
I'm pretty sure we are there, and I'm hoping that Juicy Bits is there for sure.
Yes, it might be. Maybe it's sold out already. Who knows?
True.
Hey, congrats too! I saw you guys were just named the third highest rated brewery in the world from Craft Beer and Brewing magazine. So that's sweet. Congrats on that. Just adding it to your list of accolades.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been crazy just to see things like that come in, and we've just continue to figure out what is next. I think that's a big question for all of us. What do we do now?
Yeah, I mean, you got to go after 1 and 2, right? You got to knock those guys off, and you got to claim the throne. Who was number 1 and 2 on that list? I'm just curious.
I think it was Hill Farmstead.
Okay.
And I can't remember where number 2 was, but
yeah, because you already got plans to eclipse him. I get it.
Yeah, that'll be a tough one. Those guys are killing it. But.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of good beer out there. Get the recognition that you guys have. That speaks volumes. So big congrats on that.
Thank you.
What do you guys have going right now that you're excited about? Something new and fresh for the brewery?
We've got actually adding a restaurant to our tap room in Greeley. So we'll have that kind of, hopefully by year end, we'll have that up and running, and brought in one of our favorite food trucks. Tim is the executive chef, Tim Meter, and he's running that entire thing from the kitchen, menu, everything else. So he's been busy with our project coordinating, just getting that project up and running. So that'll be hopefully year end. And then next year we'll be opening up a second tap room or down in Colorado Springs.
Oh,
So,
sweet.
so those are the two big projects we've got going on right now.
Yeah. Cover I-25 there.
Yeah, the Front Range corridor, that's kind of our bookends a little bit for our distribution as well, since we self-distribute all of our beer here in the state. We get a little bit outside those territories at times, but just kind of having two kind of retail outposts on either end of the kind of distribution footprint has been really nice to start growing both our southern footprint and then while we're still growing up the northern Front Range.
I bet it's a nice. I mean, the nice thing about that market too is it's such Denver's a fast growing city. I mean, it's a good place to be. And then, the beer scene there is phenomenal.
Yeah.
But back to the restaurant side, that's awesome. You guys are putting in a restaurant. What kind of food are you guys going to be?
We're still dialing. Yeah, we're still dialing all that in. Tim, when he was at the food truck was called the Tramp About, and they started with us they had just opened up shortly, I think before or after our tap room opened in 2015. So he had been with us just on site as a food truck since the beginning. And then obviously with COVID changed a lot of things for him. And so he, rather than trying to figure out a different way to keep the truck going or something else, kind of started a conversation with us about what that would look like in partnership and bringing him on. So we ended up hiring him to kind of run the entire thing. But he was doing, which will still adapt to what we're doing with our menu, but kind of regional American, rotating between different parts of the country. And he's very talented at anything he tackles. So there'll be I think a mix of good familiar mainstays, some kind of pub driven stuff, but also some really creative out of the box, kind of like our beer, a little bit reflective of kind of the innovation and just a little bit of kind of challenging status quo for what people expect when they go into a brew pub. So there'll be some things that are very familiar, but things that'll be challenging too, which would be really fun to see how people react.
Yeah. Like, what do you guys try to center? I know you do a lot of different beers. So you guys get creative with the stouts. You got some Berliner Weisses with the fruity side and the tart side. And then you guys are obviously crushing it with the hoppy beers. What kind of food do you see like really pairing well with a hazy? Because it's not, I can drink them with anything just because I think they're delicious. It seems like sometimes if you have the wrong food with the wrong beer, it can kind of throw both the beer and the food dish out of whack. So what's your kind of go-to, or what kind of cuisine do you try to do with the hazies?
I think that's really the great partnership with our brand in particular and the style of beers we approach and we produce is almost everything we do has at least some sort of balance to it. So it's, even our IPAs, Juicy Bits, and all of our hazy IPAs, the thing that I love most about them, and at least in terms of how they compare to classic American IPA, West Coast, is that bitterness is really dialed back. It's not nearly as dry. So there's some body behind it. So it can actually hold up to almost any pairing. Obviously for IPA in particular, I think cheese always seems to be somewhere a lot of people go. I think other kind of bites, small bites and things like that. And I think the nice thing with something like Juicy Bits is with all that fruit expression, all the citrus, all the hop, all the flavor that is all hop derived, all those fruit, kind of tropical fruit notes, kind of opens you up to a wide range of spectrums. And you can even start getting even more into a potential dessert even, which is kind of, I think a lot of folks would stray away from something like that and just always lean towards the savory, but the sweet side of pairings could work really well with, especially our hazy IPAs. So I think even our fruited beers too, there's just something that we really appreciate about balance, even though a lot of our flavors are pretty extreme and high fruit rates, high hop rates. We're really trying to dial that overall experience. We don't want you to have, one beer and it's either super acidic or it's super hoppy and bitter to where you can only have one or two. You want something that you can still maintain a lot of drinkability. So that lends itself a lot to just creativity on the menu side and the food side. So Tim will have, almost a wide range of all the different beers we produce to kind of, find some intentional pairings and then find some things that are contrasting too. So
getting into that, balancing of the beer that you guys are doing when you're, creating the recipe, how often are you guys tweaking things within a recipe?
Our approach is kind of almost constantly evolving and constantly improving. I think we've kind of adopted this mantra that we can always do better. We can always make it better. We can always improve. There's kind of this never ending, I think, spectrum of just growth, improvement, and striving for more. And that even for a beer like Juicy Bits has been true. It's a great beer. We're really proud of it. It's got a huge fan base. The customers are obviously really engaged with that brand in particular, but that doesn't mean we can't make it better. So it's not, nothing is just set in stone. It's not like hey, don't touch Juicy Bits, it's off limits. There's certain things we're not going to change. We're probably not going to change the hop profile. The Citra Mosaic and Eldorado hops we've really loved, and they kind of change year to year based on the harvest and selection. But we actually leave on Sunday for hop selection down to over to Yakima, Washington so we'll get to see this year's crop. Yeah,
I'm jealous, man. I'm jealous. That looks like an amazing time.
It is. It's a lot, a lot like Sonoma and Napa during harvest too for the kind of the wine industry. So it's a lot of fun just seeing all the other breweries that show up. But all of that is to say that the varietals we use are pretty much the same. It's just how they change year to year just based on any other crop. So based on the results of this year's harvest, we might make some small tweaks to maybe hop rates for which ones we're using. But overall, I think there's really nothing that's, hey, you can't do this to Juicy Bits. If we find a way, if we come up with a different beer that try a new process or try some other new technology, something that we're trying to bring into maybe a new product, and it makes a better beer, we'll incorporate that to Juicy Bits as well. So that's really the only beer that's the same, but almost every other beer we produce is always rotating and seasonal or one-offs. So it gives us a chance every time to take a clean slate approach, and whatever we can do to make the best beer possible, we can continue to strive for that versus a lot of people that have these brands that are essentially, etched in stone and can't change that, or at least not change it dramatically.
Yeah. I feel like in craft beer, you have to adapt. I mean, the landscape's always changing. Taste really in general, like anything in the food and beverage industry, like taste preference is always shifting. And so that's probably a good thing. When you guys are going out there to check out the hops, put them in your hands, take your pretty Instagram pictures, all that kind of stuff, do you guys work with like certain farms out there? And then within that farm, depending on the size, will they get different expression from where the hops are on the farm? Like you could have a batch of Citra, and maybe in one quadrant of the farm, that Citra tastes a little different than in another quadrant.
Yeah, that's the thing I didn't realize until we started selecting our hops a few years ago, is just how much variation there is. The same varietal like Citra. Citra is probably the most popular hop in the world right now, and seeing how in the same farm, two different lots, harvested probably within 24 hours, can still have very different expressions based on exactly what you said, like where they're growing, just the difference in shade versus how much more sun they get compared to other parts of the lot or the farm. So those nuances are really what I think kind of distinguish our beers from everyone else that's using Citra. We can be really intentional about picking the expression of Citra that fits our beers best. So rather than always just being focused on this kind of grapefruit and sometimes pith bitterness, we're focusing more on the sweet kind of citrus side of that. So tangerine, sweet orange, maybe some sweet orange peel, but we can be really, really intentional about which of those expressions we're looking for. And that's, for us, we do really enjoy getting to know the farmers and the farms that we're kind of sourcing from. But the other reality too is that we work with brokers, and they keep that process blind for our benefit, so that every year we're starting kind of blank slate. So we'll get 4 or 5, maybe 6 different lots to select from, all from different farms. We kind of judge them and analyze them all blind, so we have no idea where they're from. And then just based on the empirical quality of the lot and how it conforms to what we're looking for, that's who we select. And then we get to find out who the farm is, which is really fun. But it's been interesting to see how some of the farms we've been working with have been the same, and some have changed almost every year, just depending on which varietal and what we're looking for. So it's a really cool, it's probably the most, I think the most intentional part of what we do is this 1 week of the year, we get to go out and kind of almost, curate the entire year's worth of volume for our hops. It's a pretty critical point, but it's also really fun. And it's also, for us, it gives us that one more layer of control that a lot of smaller breweries or even larger breweries, they're kind of at the mercy of. They need so much more acreage than we need, that they are a little bit handcuffed to how much variety they can pick from.
Right. It's such an important ingredient too. I get there's a lot that goes into the process, but if you don't have good quality hops good luck. When you're checking out the hops out there and, trying to get a sensory profile on it, is it pretty much just kind of, smash it up, smell it, or are you guys, putting it, are you ever putting it like in some water, tasting it? Do you try to, make it a, kind of a 360 approach, or is it just pretty much all through the nose?
I think 360 is kind of the best way to describe it, because there's a lot of visuals that we can get just based on, depending on which farm it came from. There's, as they're creating the bales and getting everything ready for pelletization. So when we buy them and use them, they're typically pelletized. So we'll assess them based on just the raw harvest into bales, and then we'll get what they call a brewer's cut. So they'll take the bales after they've been dried very quickly and then condensed before they're ready to pelletize them. They'll cut from the center of that, and that's what they use as the brewer's cut. So that's just a wholly
the brewer's cut.
The brewer's cut,
like the filet mignon of the
yes, yeah. It's usually within 24 hours of harvest, if not sooner. So you get to see it right off the vine, essentially. But there's some visuals we can look at and just kind of see the quality of the leaves. They're de-stemming them and keeping all the kind of branches and things out, but there's always some other matter that gets in, and how much of that is there. And then also seeds play a role in that. Then after that, we can kind of, we do the crush, the rub, where you kind of rub it between your hands as much as you can, a lot of friction and heat to get some of that oil out. And that's kind of where we get the best, really, determination of the quality of that hop, and the aroma. All the oil content will be really indicative of what we're looking for. Teas, a lot of folks will steep it very quickly in some warm water just to create a real quick tea. It's not the best way to really get a sense of how it's going to interact once you start brewing with it, but it's just another layer. So you can kind of go. I mean, I've seen people chew on it before, which is probably not recommended, but it's
just feel like you just only taste the bitter compounds.
I'm sure everybody has their own kind of protocols and how they do it. It's been fun to learn that. I think the first year I went out, I was just totally like, well, this salt looks great. I don't know, but you kind of get better and you bring other people into the fold. And that's been a really fun experience. Last year, we weren't able to go out with COVID, and it was a really unique opportunity to overnight those lots to us.
Yeah.
And so it meant we got to include our entire production and packaging team versus just 3 or 4 of us on the leadership kind of side of that. So, there's some benefits to being out there. You get a little bit more real time. If let's say you have 4 lots to pick from for Citra and you aren't really happy with any of them, you can get them, kind of reject those and ask for 2 or 3 more and get them right away, versus the kind of delay with shipping. But with, the way all those brokers and suppliers pivoted last year, I think it was even, some benefits that way, where we get to include more voices and give a little bit more of an insight to the rest of our team that may not get a chance to go out to Yakima anytime real soon.
Will you guys brew a wet hop beer with some of those, freshly picked flowers?
We haven't in the past, but this year we are looking into trying to do just a small batch of like a fresh hop version of Juicy Bits with one of the selected lots. The hard part for us is obviously being so far from Yakima. Most places in the Washington area can either have it delivered same day or picked up. The way that they get it out here usually is by air freight. So it adds substantially to the cost. Now, that being said, it's also a unique expression you can only do once a year. So it's probably worth the cost. So this year we're looking into doing that. And I think we'll end up doing kind of a fresh hop take on IPA.
What's the difference? Just remind me, between wet hop and fresh hop.
Yeah. So wet hop's the better term for that. The fresh hop term is a little bit more vague. A lot of folks will use it for actual wet hops, which are not processed, just harvested and not dried, or somewhat dried, but not processed, getting ready to pelletize. Fresh hop can be like Sierra Nevada's Celebration is a good example of that, where they use within the first, they'll get some of the first pellets. So after they've selected their lots in September, they'll usually end up with their pellets very early. I think probably October, November. The rest of us are probably end of year, maybe even early 2022. So it takes 3 to 4 months, because you've got millions of pounds of hops being processed, all harvested within a few weeks. And then now the process of pelletization takes, 3 to 4 months. So a lot of folks will, use that fresh hop term as something that's already been processed into pellets, but still within a few months of harvest. But wet hop is truly just right off the vine. Within 24 hours, you're getting that into the beer, whether it's on the hot side, which is for kind of what we use whirlpool terms, or dry hopped. You can dry hop with wet hops, which can have some interesting results too. Usually the preferred side's on the hot side, and like a hop back or something like that.
Yeah, the fresh hop, wet hop beers, they're interesting because I don't know. It seems like you get a lot more like green plant floral, like you don't get quite as much of that like in your face tropical flavor, but it's still good and it's complex. Like it's got like a uniqueness of it, which is probably why people keep making those when it's harvest season. Either that or they just want to stay relevant and throw something up that, hey, we're doing a wet hot beer type of thing.
That's been our tension for a long time, is that a lot of wet hop beers just have that really vegetal note, which isn't that off-putting in classic IPA, but in particularly in like hazy IPA and kind of New England style IPA, that's really fly in the face of all, like you said, the flavor, the tropical fruit, and all those big fruit notes that you're looking for. So we've had a lot more reticence about it, but I think this year, for just trying to be a little bit more in tune with the harvest and kind of that entire process, and really just getting, I mean, it's the only time we get to do this. So it's, even if it's not something we would want to do year round, it's kind of this unique opportunity to give consumers a little bit of a, hey, this is what the raw kind of hop character is like. And then you guys get to see it in its final form in a few months. So
yeah, there's a fun art side on it for you guys too. It's like,
sure. And the romanticism is hard to beat too,
exactly.
Something with that 24. I mean, I think even just being in Yakima, that changed my perspective on wet hop beers. Before that, I think I was more of that camp of like, yeah, it's not a better version of the brand I really love. I'd rather just have that one all kind of buttoned up and ready. But then you get to go see this and experience it. And we just never work with whole leaf hops. So it's kind of, for us, a unique exercise that we don't really get to do very often. So.
Yeah, I bet that changes some of the calculations and whatnot on brew day.
Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, there's a few folks, I know Odell still uses a lot of whole leaf hops, but it's just, I think it's depending on your system and how you've designed your production. It's more difficult for some than it is for others. And especially at our scale, it ties up a lot more time, and we're brewing 7 days a week and, almost not 24 hours, but we have full production days. So there's not really a lot of room for an extra 2 hours or something on a single turn usually.
Well, and they're trying to I feel like the hop companies out there are trying to get away with getting less and less vegetal hop material into hop products now.
Yeah, like, you're exactly right.
Like you got like the cryo hops or, like hop extracts, and they're just whatever they can do to just get those intense flavors without all the vegetal material that can have those off flavors. So it's kind of an interesting juxtaposition, but kind of what I found just through drinking experience is more different ways, to kind of hit it, the better the beer tastes. Because I've had some beers that are just like all cryo hopped, and those beers are weird. But you have a beer that incorporates some cryo hops into the dry hop process, and it goes pretty nice. And from my experience in my little home brewery downstairs, it's kind of the same thing. Just use it kind of as a supplement type of deal.
Yeah,
stick with the
I think you're right. We've only started incorporating cryo in the last few months, and just in small parts in different areas. And I think cryo was huge at the, kind of development because of the yield improvements. You just are using half the actual, hop matter for just as much flavor and aroma. The harder part was just getting it incorporated. So now that we have cryo pellets, it kind of gives you a little, because before cryo powder was really only useful in the hot side with whirlpooling, and very rarely would be successful in dry hop because you're just not getting much surface contact. But now that they've really improved that process with pelletization of cryo hops, that gives a lot more utility for potentially dry hopping, which we've started experimenting with as well.
Yeah, I saw you guys have a cool IPA portfolio. One of the ones that kind of jumped out at me was the cold fermented IPAs, and I was digging into it a little bit, and it's not technically a IPL. It's still an IPA. It's just cold fermented.
Yeah, it's a little different take. It's almost more Kolsch inspired, I think, in terms of, I think we've seen a lot of different approaches since, I can't remember the name of the brewery that kind of started this out and wanted to distinguish between his IPL and kind of a cooler fermented ale. And I think our approach was actually to do multiple trials. And so we did more traditional IPL, like with lager strain at cooler temps, just like we would any other lager, still brewed like our IPAs as far as hop rates, but fermentation was much more, traditional lager. We also did a cooler temp of our house yeast, which is what we use for Juicy Bits, the London Ale 3 strain, but just dropping that temp much, much lower than normal. Not quite down to lagering temps, but kind of closer to cooler Kolsch hybrid temps. And then we did a more traditional kind of Kolsch strain too, that was in that same idea of, a hybrid ale strain that performs really well at cool temps. And so we ended up blending those, and that's kind of how we created Chill. And it was fun for us to experiment. And also, like you said, the hardest part, especially on the consumer side, is understanding how is this different than an IPL, and what are because for us, IPA is very yeast, driven, versus West Coast IPA, really just trying to keep the yeast as clean as possible, very, very low esters, not a whole lot of expression. You just want it to be crisp, clean, and attenuated. For hazy IPA, New England style IPA, Juicy Bits in particular, we want a lot of that flavor to be derived by the yeast and by esters and by, a lot of the kind of stone fruit notes we have in a lot of our IPAs are driven by our fermentation. And so I think that was kind of for us, the catalyst of how we could experiment. How can we still get some of that and not completely abandon that, but still almost clean it up a little bit to be a little bit crisper expression. So it was kind of fun for us to hybridize that style in our own way. And I love that kind of idea of just like, there's no more, this has to fit this criteria to be this kind of style. It's just more of a opening all the guideline, whatever the style guideline that you're brewing to. It's not as strict. I don't think anybody really feels like they need to brew to style as much anymore. And a lot of the benefits of that is just experimentation and innovation.
Yeah, I think just that multi-dimensional approach is great. At least it makes for a really fun time going to the brewery. It's a great way to get people to try a bunch of beers. Oh man, I got to try their hazies. Got to try the cold fermented beer. I got to try the West Coast. I saw you guys have a West Coast IPA. So you guys are putting something for everything with hop lovers out there, and that's cool to see. What's your favorite hop to work with, or top two if that's too tough of a question?
I think for me, El Dorado has been, we really discovered it when we were trying to develop Juicy Bits, back in 2016. So that was a varietal that to be honest, it was just an affordable hop at the time. And we needed something to offset the cost of Mosaic and Citra, which are still historically one of the higher priced just because of the demand. But 5-6 years ago, there was very little interest / demand for El Dorado, but the expression was right in line with everything we were looking for. It was very kind of mango, tropical fruit, very expressive, kind of bright on the nose, without kind of a lot of the harshness we've had with other significantly high dry hop rates and other varietals. And that has also been, I think, just by nature of selection, the last 2 or 3 years, it's probably been one of our favorite of 4 or 5 varietals we select in Yakima. And I think that's just kind of lend itself to us experimenting with it more, utilizing it more in other recipes. And obviously for Juicy Bits, it's become such a big, not that it's more important than Citra or Mosaic, but it seems to be carrying more than its share of weight in the last few years, just because of how much, we've loved those particular lots we selected.
And when you're brewing, your hoppy beers, how much emphasis, if you could tell me, hey, Jared, I think that the most important part of adding hops is this. Is that during the boil, which I know you're going to say probably no. Is it, on like a hot side whirlpool, or is it on the cold side in a dry hop?
I think we usually, because our dry hop rates are so high, that's usually where it's most critical for us. We don't really have a system where we can do an effective kind of hop stand where we lower the temp coming off the kettle into the whirlpool. We've done it a few times. It's just with our kind of the way, we're brewing 4 or 5 batches a day, that adds a lot of time.
Yeah.
But as a home brewer, that would be my preferred method to experiment with, just because you can start to get a lot more expression from the hops without the bitterness. Once you get in that 170, 180 range. Here at Elevation, it helps us a lot because we're already boiling 203, 204. So we're already much lower for kind of isomerization and bitterness. So we can push our whirlpool load a little bit higher. We don't do much, if anything, in the actual kettle for, boil additions, but whirlpool, we can kind of push that limit higher than we could at sea level, just because our ambient, with the ambient temperature drop and our elevation, we're, probably whirlpooling just under 200, 195 or so, maybe less in the winter. But if we had and maybe on the next iteration of a brew house or even some production changes, we might look at what can we do to cool those temperatures even more to get some of my favorite IPAs in the state come from Outer Range up in Frisco. And I think Lee in particular has that benefit of even higher elevation where they are boiling even below 200. And so their whirlpool temps are much lower. So they can push the whirlpool volumes and loads a lot higher than we can without the effect of that additional bitterness. So as a home brewer, that's, I think, one of the easiest ways they can outcompete kind of the professional brewers is they have more control over those types of processes where, you know, dropping down to 170, 180, you can do some really cool experiments.
And that's the fun part. I use I got my little Blickman electric kettle and hook my pump up to it, and I'll chill it real quick and then just set the heat for like 180, and then sometimes mess around, even throwing like a 165, 170, second Whirlpool edition, that kind of stuff. It is fun, and it's interesting to see what hops kind of saturate in that Whirlpool and what ones don't, because sometimes you can't really tell, but then you'll get some that just really come through and shine. As you can tell, I'm a bit of a hop head. That's I feel like this has all been dominated by hop talk here.
No, it sounds like you got a pretty awesome setup too to be able to do. I mean, that was my favorite part of home brewing was I did a lot of barrel aged stuff just because that's what I was most passionate about. But that was the hardest to do on a continuous basis, obviously with a home, barely a 1 barrel, maybe a 20-gallon setup. But yeah, IPA, I think I brewed probably 3-1 over everything else we made. And so when we opened up, it was almost a challenge to say, like, we only want to make one kind of IPA to start. And that obviously evolved and changed. And now we make almost 60% of our production is IPA, and 35-40% of that's just juicy bits.
Yeah. Well, like I said, man, you guys have a pretty solid portfolio. It's like something for everybody for sure. And you're in a great spot in the States for beer.
Yeah.
Greeley, Colorado. What led you to open it up in Greeley?
So I moved to Greeley from North Carolina actually in 2008. So I just came straight from Chapel Hill, North Carolina to Greeley, Colorado, and I fell in love with Greeley and have never left since. I enjoyed kind of the entire state, Denver, Boulder, Fort Collins, kind of for the metro. They all have something really fun and unique to offer. The thing that I've learned with Greeley though is that until people actually spend time here, you don't get to see or hear much about all the amazing things that are happening. So it's been my home since I've lived in Colorado. So when we opened the brewery, my partner Colin, we met kind of homebrewing in the garage with a group of other kind of homebrewers, and so he's lived here longer than I have, and then my wife and I have lived here and raised our kids here. So it was, for both Colin and myself, this is where home is. This is our family and kind of where our roots are. So when we decided to kind of proceed with opening a brewery, it was not even a question of where we go. It was more of where in Greeley are we going to go. And that was just by default. And I think it shocked a lot of people. Maybe after we got kind of, established and started landing on the national scene or even the statewide scene, everyone kind of asked that same question, like, why Greeley? It's like, well, we didn't know where else we would go. It's kind of, this is the backyard, this is home. And we just kind of continued to grow from that and just set up shop here permanently, bought our property back in 2018. So we own almost the entire block that our brewery is located on. So we've got room to grow. We've got kind of almost, control over all those next steps for what's, as long as Greeley's still accommodating to us, and they've been more than accommodating so far, I don't think we'll ever leave. Doesn't mean we won't open up in other places like the Springs, but we also love the idea that we can be a part of moving the needle in a different direction in Greeley. So we've seen so much change and growth happen. I think it's the census data last year. Greeley was the fastest growing metro in Colorado, and then the 4th fastest growing in the country. A little over, I think, almost 30% growth, 28% growth. And a lot of that's just being us. We get to be a part of what the next decade looks like here in Greeley, and who we want to collaborate with, what kind of, food scene we want to engage with, what other other artists, and all the things that are growing and changing. We get to be, we have a seat at that table, which is really fun.
Yeah, that's sweet. That's one of the best parts about, breweries is you can be a pioneer, and you can just, you can put your roots down seemingly wherever you want. If you want to put it in the worst part of a city, it can work. If you want to go throw it on a farm in the country, it can work. And if you just want to open up shop in your hometown, wherever you are, it'll work too. It seems like it can really go anywhere. I feel like it's proven that.
Yeah. And we've got a little bit of a bias for the downtown, but my wife is the executive director for our downtown development authority. So we've been kind of invested in downtown for a long time, just seeing it kind of revitalize and grow and change. So it's been really fun being we're on the north end of downtown Greeley, kind of almost the end of the 8th Ave corridor, which is fun. But it's been amazing, even just the 7 years we've been there, just to see how much that area has changed and grown and has nothing but, runway left. There's so much opportunity there. So it's been, for us, it's been just that's, I think, something that fuels us just as much as the beer, is just that ability to reinvest in this community and figure out, what else can we do to address the needs, and what can we, what resources can we bring, what kind of platform can we bring to those conversations. We've launched a nonprofit foundation back in 2019, I believe, for our first invitational in 2018. And that has been really fun. And we've kind of grown that from 501c3 to now just a bigger umbrella of brewing better communities is kind of the mantra we're using for that. And it's just kind of a way for us to see what we can do to, invest back into Greeley and Northern Colorado and Colorado as a whole as well.
Nice. That's sweet. Speaking of Colorado as a whole, are you a Broncos fan, or are you staying with? Are you a Panthers fan? Coming from Carolina,
coming from North Carolina was a little tougher, but I've adopted the Broncos. So my son he just turned 10, and he's a huge Broncos fan. So that's obvious. He's born here now, so it's he's still a Tar Heel. So I don't think that's up for debate for him. He doesn't have much of a choice there, but he's moved the needle for me to firmly Broncos fan.
Good. I can't stand the Panthers. Only bad things have happened when I've played there. Tore one of my triceps there. Season ended in the playoffs twice there. It's I'll be fine not going back to Charlotte. even though it is a pretty city.
It's amazing place. Yeah, we have some friends there too, and other breweries that are really great too. Speaking of a good beer scene, North Carolina's got a
I want to visit that whole Asheville area. Looks beautiful too, with all the beer and bike tours and all that stuff. Talk about hitting the romantic side. That definitely comes to mind.
Yeah, it feels like it has a lot in common with Fort Collins and even Boulder. Almost Asheville's. It's like I think the reason that New Belgium kind of set up in Asheville and other breweries have kind of located there is just how much it has in common with places out here. So,
yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
What do you think is one kind of misspread lie or widespread lie in craft beer? Something that just goes around and never really gets called out.
Yeah, that's tough. I think a lot of it is even just the term craft, or even I guess maybe ownership and size. I think we've seen so much shakeup in the last 10 years in who owns which brewery, and independence is really what that all points to. And I think it's easy to say you drink local beer and then not to know that it's owned by a corporation, that most of those resources aren't staying in the community that you're buying it from. Nothing wrong with that. It's just very different. I think the bigger kind of corporations have done a really good job to kind of hide that fact or keep it from being well known. And so we value independence as members of the Brewers Association and kind of their Independence Matters campaign. And it's been really, it's been a challenge, but I think it's also been really fun to figure out how can we advocate for all of our fellow independently owned craft breweries across the country. And getting kind of awareness out is the first step. And I think that seal that the Brewers Association kind of adopted a couple of years ago has helped at least give you some.
They have it right there on the can, the little independent bottle.
Yeah, it's the upside down bottle, and it's also looks kind of like a fermenter. I guess depends on who you ask about it, but I think just having that seal, informed customers can use that. Not that every brewery that's independent is using that, but it's just one more. Like, how else would you know? How would you be able to go peruse a liquor store shelf and figure out, who is, if I'm buying something from a brewery in Greeley, how much of that money is staying here in Greeley or Colorado, Northern Colorado. And for us, that's important. We have, 52 employees and growing. So it's, for us to be able to continue to add jobs and drive, our local economy, it matters that money stays here versus going off to, an outside owner somewhere, out of state or out of the country.
Yeah.
I think that's the one thing that most consumers not that they have to make that decision, but when they want to, I think that's the thing that's a little bit more cloudy right now. And I think we're working towards making that a little bit more defined.
No, I think that's a great answer. And, it is nice because, especially just going through the pandemic, people were trying to, figure out how to support businesses, to keep their doors open. And I know a lot of the craft breweries in Grand Rapids, we're doing a really good job with, getting to go beer sales and, just trying to do whatever to keep it going. And a lot of them, have made it so far. So that's good to see. And then that independent seal is nice. And to piggyback on the independent seal, for a little label reading 101, this is not for you, Neil, because you know this, but if you guys are drinking a hazy IPA, go ahead and look at the bottom of the can, or maybe it's on the label, but look for a brew date on it, because if that thing is, to me, it's almost like I get it's a completely different beer after 3 months for sure. Yeah. Like after 3 months, it's really hard to be any kind of, resemblance to what it was when it was young. But that now I'm asking myself this question: what's the widest spread? And that's going to lump somebody into the I don't like IPA category, because they had a IPA that sat on a shelf for 9 months, and maybe it was even sitting there warm. The hops are going to get, all oxidized in there, and the beer's going to fall apart. And anyway, so independent seal is what I was going back to. But yeah, check that Best By date at the bottom, because then at least when your craft beer friends come over and raid your beer fridge, you're not giving them like IPA that's like a year and a half old.
Yeah. Or finding it on, and I think that's like, as an informed consumer, I hope consumers would let us know if they find an old, out of date beer on our shelves in Colorado.
Yeah, good joke, Neil. Good joke. Yeah. Good joke. Coming from the guy who had a really hard time finding your beer on the shelf in Colorado.
There's probably places where it sits for longer than a week. I'm sure there's got to be, but yeah, maybe not in 2021. It might be more frequent than in 18. But
okay.
But yeah, I think that's the thing. I think people just assume like, oh, it's just stale and it's going to be that way. But what happens is consumer, stops buying that product because it's not. And so I'd say, I encourage consumers, send an email or a message off to that brewery and say, hey, I found this at this place. And a lot of times it's just a small oversight that just, maybe they didn't rotate the stock. Maybe they're continually delivering new product, and that old one just wasn't rotated, soon enough, and just needs to be pulled. But there's no way for us to know if, especially independent breweries that are self-distributed like ours, we have a pretty good system of auditing that, but doesn't mean we can't have something overlooked. And like you said, that's the last thing we want, is someone to experience Juicy Bits at, 90 days and sitting on a warm store shelf. It's definitely not the same beer and not what we intended.
No, it's like the neighborhood watch. Like,
yeah,
let us know if you see our child roaming the streets after hours, please.
Yeah, please tell us.
Yeah. All right. One more question. It's the final night on Earth. You got one beer to drink. It's not going to be WeldWerks. It can't be yours. That's the only stipulation, but you can drink as much of this beer as you want. No repercussions the next day, because life is done as we know it. So what beer are you going with?
Ooh, that is a tough one. It's probably going to have to be Russian River Pliny the Elder. It's probably for me still the, gold standard of double IPA and kind of West Coast. It's also one of the beers that got me most excited about brewing IPA. I think Vinny in particular, the way he approached that beer, putting that recipe out for homebrewers 10, 12, 15 years ago. I don't even know when he initially published it. I came across it over almost 10 years ago. And that totally changed my, my view of IPA, brewing IPA. And he essentially just put that out there. And I thought, for essentially the top rated beer for, especially top rated IPA for so long, for that to be publicly available for any home brewer to go and just, brew the recipe according to what Vinny put out there, it's a pretty bold and confident move. And I think it paid dividends. I think I've seen that brand grow much, much larger than how much they distribute it, because they're still, pretty small in comparison to something you can find nationally. And I think the momentum it has is due in part to just putting that recipe out there. And so it's still, every time I drink, I still have those kind of nostalgic memories of brewing my own clone, drinking my version of it against the commercial. We would get that here in Colorado once a month. We still do, I think. And but every month you just, there's a couple stores, even in Greeley, you just know on this Friday, third Friday of the month or whatever, it would just show up. You just go grab a couple of the, maybe 3 or 4 of the 16-ounce bottles and compare it to the homebrew you just packaged and the clone recipe and see how it held up. And it was always better. His was always better than yours, but you were always like, I'm getting closer.
Yeah. It's almost like there's gotta be one thing that he's not putting in that recipe, because it never comes out like quite as bright, or just like that. He has like such a, light straw color to the beer. And I feel like whenever I brew it, it just ends up, like a shade too dark or something. There's so much, masterful art that goes into that beer. But yeah, funny you say that. I mean, that was like Pliny the Elder. That's the first beer that I remember like trying to time up when I went to the liquor store, because they got it in Thursday mornings or whatever. It was when I was in the Bay Area playing for the Raiders. And I actually was able to make it up to their tap room before I left. So it was sweet. Actually amazing food at their tap room. Little Pliny bites are out of this world. And to me, it's like if I hear fresh Pliny, it's like Pavlov's dog. Like you just say fresh Pliny and I'm ready. I'm ready to have my glass filled. Neil, where can people follow along with what WeldWorks is doing?
Yeah, I think our website kind of aggregates everything. So weldworks.com, weldworksbrewing.com, either one. Our social media, we are pretty active on both Instagram and Facebook. So we post new releases, new events, all the engagement we've got going on. So you can follow us on either of those platforms. But we have so much in the works. And, I think our website or our social media, or Instagram and Facebook, are probably the best way to stay up to date and see what's next, see what's coming soon, and all that.
Are we going to see a picture of you sniffing some hops in the weeks to come?
I'm sure. Yeah, we've been given very strict, make sure you get plenty of pictures, and it's not hard. Like you said, it's the perfect.
You're gonna do the
the hop,
the LeBron James, Kevin Garnett hop dusting before the game there.
Yeah, it's be a lot of green hands, and I'm sure there'll be some really fun pics. But I'm excited. It should be this year's harvest it's always fun to just kind of read the reports all kind of summer long leading up to harvest, and until you get out there, it doesn't feel quite real. It's like you can kind of read all the quality reports, but
hey, it's Christmas morning. You don't know what you're going to get, man. You want to open your present. You want to see what Santa brought.
I think our first selection is scheduled for Monday. So it's kind of like, all right, I'm going to see what the harvest brought. So
that's sweet. Well, good luck with that.
Thank you.
I appreciate you for coming on, and let's stay in touch.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. And if you're back out in Colorado again, let us know. We'd love to host you up at the brewery, and then we'll stay in touch.
That'd be sweet. I got to get out there soon.
Yeah, sounds great.